All right, so good evening, friends. Welcome to tonight's event on Connecticut's innovation economy. I'm Bill Harmer, the Executive Director of the Westport Library. We're delighted to have you join us for what promises to be an enlightening and inspiring discussion. At the Westport Library, innovation is not just a word, it's a way of life. We take immense pride in the fact that we are Connecticut's only five-star public library, and our commitment to fostering innovation has been at the forefront of our mission and everything that we do. From the inception of the library's makerspace to the establishment of our state-of-the-art Verso Media Studios, we've continually sought to provide a platform where creativity and innovation can thrive. Our library has become a dynamic hub for those who seek to explore, create, and innovate. And so tonight, we're honored to partner with Startup Westport, a newly formed organization dedicated to harnessing our tech and entrepreneurial talent here in Westport and transforming it into a thriving innovation hub. Together, we aspire to cultivate an environment where ideas flourish and innovation take root. But the heart of tonight's program lies in our esteemed guest speaker, Mr. Daniel O'Keefe, the newly appointed Chief Innovation Officer for the state of Connecticut. Mr. O'Keefe brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise in the world of innovation, and we are eager to hear his insights on Connecticut's innovation ecosystem. Before we dive into the program, I have the privilege of introducing a distinguished member of our community, Mr. Cliff Serlin. Cliff is a former member of the library's Board of Trustees and one of the founders and managing director of Launch Capital. He will share more information with you about Startup Westport and provide an introduction to tonight's speaker. Once again, thank you all for coming out this evening.
Wow, what a crowd. Just an amazing, amazing crowd. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Can't tell you how exciting it is for all of us. We appreciate everyone bearing with us with these last minute changes. I know that a lot of you are here to see Dan Bikel and hear him speak about artificial intelligence. We will schedule that night sometime, most likely early 2024. So bear with us, and we wish Dan well. Dan, unfortunately, was hit with COVID, so part of the reality today. So, but thank you to Dan O'Keefe for stepping in, and we're looking forward to hearing his comments. So, let me jump in and tell you a little bit about what we're doing here at Startup Westport. I can't begin to tell you how gratifying it is to see this audience here. What was initially just an idea has expanded and become a room now that is filled with hundreds of people. It's incredible. So thank you to Bill Harmer and the Westport Library staff. We are grateful for their partnership and their support of our efforts. Now that we have you all here, I wanted to talk a little bit about Startup Westport, our mission, as well as our future plans. In Lin-Manuel's brilliant play Hamilton, he tells the story of one of our nation's most prominent founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton. When most people think of Alexander Hamilton, they think about the founder of the nation's first bank, a brilliant author, a revolutionary, an advisor to our first president, and someone who doesn't have a particularly good shot. When I think about Alexander Hamilton, I think about a great entrepreneur and innovator, a natural problem solver. Miranda's play about Hamilton captures a moment in time when change was abound in New York. I think that same type of change is happening here in Westport right now. With the tectonic shifts that have resulted from COVID, we find ourselves in a place, in a town that has limitless possibilities, and that is why we started Startup Westport. Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. History is happening here in Westport. This is our moment in time to shine. I've had many conversations with people in this room about what has drawn you to this organization. In every conversation, there's a common theme. New to town, part of a previous innovation ecosystem, the desire to interact in person on a local level. I want to repeat that again. The desire to interact in person on a local level, and most importantly, the desire to give back to our community here where you've planted roots. To be fair, much of what we're creating here with Startup Westport exists in New York City. But New York City is a faraway place, and so much of that talent has come to Westport. So why not build what is currently in New York, in Boston, in San Francisco, here in Westport? It's a win-win scenario where I think every one of us is going to benefit, except for Metro North. Westport is a place of great opportunity that stands for a certain level of excellence. We've reinvented ourselves over the years and will continue to do so. We're a cultural hub that attracts artists, musicians, authors, and thought leaders. And now we'd like to add a new chapter to the storied history of Westport. It's time for us to embrace our tech and innovation DNA. Towards that end, we've recently crafted a mission statement, which I'm pleased to present here tonight. To activate and engage Westport's growing tech and innovation community. When the Startup Westport Committee got together to discuss what we wanted to stand for, there were a few descriptors that were highlighted and jumped out at us. Activate, encourage, facilitate, local, thought leadership, connectivity, attract, and community. I believe we've captured all of that in our mission statement here. So, how will we do this? We have ambitious plans for the future. Continued meetups like tonight, and if the start of this evening was any indication, the meetup part is obviously what everyone is excited about. Just trying to get everybody away from the bar was a little bit of a process, so hopefully very positive conversations were had over there. Education, mentorship. Hopefully we're going to be able to partner with our amazing school system and a soon-to-be-announced pitch competition. Mark your calendars for November 28th. We'll be having a holiday party at the barn at Westport's Playhouse, and look forward to everyone joining us. None of this would be possible without the public-private partnership that we've created with the town. And we can't begin to thank our amazing First Select Woman, Jen Tucker, and our incredible Chief of Police, Fodi Kaskanas, for all of their support. So thank you. There's a reason that their pictures are up here in stars. So how can you help us? Show up, which you've done tonight, engage, and congregate. Half the battle is getting people together, and this group has shown a tremendous desire for interaction. Our first event was here about 7 months ago, and we had 80 people. Our next event was at La Plage, and we had something like 125 people. And now tonight, we're well over 200. I call that extremely strong product market fit. So, we always want to talk about our success stories. And there's one here in Westport, and the founder is actually here tonight. At one of our recent events, the founder of Manifest, which is a cybersecurity company headquartered here in Westport and led by Mark Frankel, who also is a Colgate grad, and I've seen a number of Colgate grads here tonight, so it's a pleasure to see that. Mark made a connection with another member of the Startup Westport community who was able to introduce him to the ideal counterpart or the perfect person for him to connect with at a major defense contractor. Think Raytheon, Northrop, Lockheed. As a result of that introduction, Mark was able to make a presentation, and ultimately the defense contractor decided to buy his product and enter into an agreement with him. So that was just as a result of a conversation that happened here at Startup Westport. Additionally, Mark and Manifest were awarded a Air Force Research Laboratory Phase 2 contract for its software supply chain application. That's a lot of words there. Don't even try and ask me what Mark's company Manifest does. He explained it to me last week, and it's incredibly impressive. So this contract was a gateway to further opportunities with the Department of Defense. So as Mark was going through the process of applying for this next phase 2, he connected with our first select woman, Jen Tooker, who was able to introduce Mark and Manifest to Governor Lamont as well as Representative Himes, who were able to send in supporting letters to the Department of Defense. The hope is that that application and those supporting letters will lead to a $1.8 million Defense Department funding grant. So fingers crossed, amazing story. It all came out of Mark, who's a great networker somewhere here, and his ability to interact and everybody else's support of his endeavors. So take action now. That's our request. To be more specific to everybody in this room, we'd encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, join our LinkedIn group, and continue to send us ideas about how we continue to expand our organization. If you want to help, please step forward. If you need help, please raise your hand. Mark's success is a testament to that philosophy. Finally, at some point in the not-so-distant future, we plan to formalize our efforts here and become a 501c3. So, for anyone who's interested in helping us with that endeavor, whether it be sponsorship or application, please find me later, and we're always in need of funding. So, on behalf of the Startup Westport Committee, Peter Propp, Jane Norris, Sam Hendel, Matt Gorin, Stefano Pacifico, and Dan Bickel, we thank you for your support. And as Alexander Hamilton would say, there's a million things we haven't done, just you wait and see. Let's continue to make Westport the greatest town in the world. Thank you. Now, onto the exciting part of the evening. It's my pleasure to welcome Dan O'Keefe here this evening. We'll extend our profound thank you to Dan, who I believe I called less than 48 hours ago to ask him to pinch hit, and he was gracious enough to make his way over here. And luckily, he's from New Canaan. I believe it was a date night with his wife, and so we promised to buy his wife flowers for allowing you to come. So thank you, Dan. We appreciate it. Just a little bit about Dan. Dan is the newly appointed Chief Innovation Officer for the state of Connecticut. That information is in the public domain, but hasn't formally been announced. So we have the benefit of hearing from Dan before the formal announcement of his appointment by Governor Lamont this coming Monday. Dan is a growth equity investor. He has worked as the managing director at Apex Digital, as well as a general partner at TCV. Dan serves as the chairman of the Opportunity Network, an education-focused nonprofit reaching over 40,000 potential students in historically underrepresented communities. OpNet is also actively supported by Apex Foundation. Dan holds an MBA with high distinctions from Harvard Business School, where he serves as the president of the alumni board, and has a bachelor's from Brown University, where he serves on its presidential leadership council. Very impressive. So please welcome Dan O'Keefe. And Dan, take it away.
Thank you, Cliff. You know, hearing my bio while you're sitting there is like when they're singing happy birthday to you, and it's just so incredibly uncomfortable, you just want it to stop. So thankfully it has stopped, and now I can get up here and talk about something more interesting than myself, as a big picture of myself pops up behind me. So it is true, 48 hours ago I got this call. It isn't formally announced yet, that does happen next week. These slides were pulled together in the last 24 hours. I have no talking notes, I'm gonna wing it. and I got here late, which means I didn't get to the bar, which means I'm gonna wing it sober. So I'm gonna ask you to be super effusive with your praise, your applause, maybe some laughter. Just help me out here as I make bad jokes. By the way, First Select Woman, thank you. Chief of Police, thank you for all you've done, both with your service, but also with this community. I know you've played a big role here. So you were supposed to see this stand tonight. By the way, I'm curious how many of you didn't know the speaker had switched and still thought you were gonna see this stand tonight. This would have been actual intelligence talking about artificial intelligence. Unfortunately, instead, this is still a thing. By the way, Google funny coronavirus cartoon. There aren't a lot of options. This was the one I was able to find. But we wish him a fast recovery, and you got this guy instead. So Cliff mentioned a little bit about my background, but I come from the investment world. So last 25 years, I've been investing in growth stage technology companies. Growth stage is 20 million plus in revenues. These were companies, these weren't startups, these were typically companies with a degree of scale. And my whole role was to help them continue that scale. Did that across a few companies over the course of that 25 years, but always had a goal of reserving time for service. My wife and I were always focused on saving time to give back. And if you think to yourself, like, what does an investment background have to do with public service? I have spent the last 25 years understanding markets and understanding some of the challenges that my companies or companies that I've spent time with have gone through. You know, how do you scale? So now we've come up with this tagline. This is a newly created position. It's being architected in real time. In that is great opportunity, but also that's a great challenge. It's for us to figure out what this is all going to mean. But I am summarizing it this way: to engage, enable, and ensure equitable access to the innovation economy throughout Connecticut. And I'll go into a lot of detail about what I mean by the innovation economy. First, I thought I would just kind of give you guys my view on the state of the state. For those of you that have been here for a while, there was a point at which they described our economy as in a state of permanent fiscal crisis. That's not a good thing, by the way, for the non-economists in the room. Thankfully now we're in a much, much, much better place. This year we just closed out the last fiscal year with our 5th year of fiscal surpluses, over $1 billion. Our first tax breaks in 20 years, $600 million delivered back to our constituents. We've paid down $7.7 billion in pension liabilities since 2000. Our rainy day fund, this is to get us through the next recession. You know, this current recession has been 6 months away for the last 12 months, but when and if a recession shows up, we do sit at our statutory cap. So we have $3.3 billion put away to get us through that. And in 2022, our GDP grew 17th fastest in the country. That's up from 49th, by the way. In the year 2000, we were the 2nd worst performing economy in the pandemic. Clearly, it's because we're over-indexed towards the financial services industry. By the way, any guesses on who was the worst performing economy in the country? It was Hawaii, over-indexed towards the tourism world, of course. And all that's led to improving credit ratings. So we've seen the first increases in our credit ratings across all 4 agencies in the last 20 years. So the foundation is back in a stable place, and this is part of what I got excited about. You can't really build and grow if your foundation, if your house isn't in order. And now our house is in order. All that leads up to a state that's an international leader. If we were our own country, we would be the 8th largest in the world in output per capita. By the way, you'll see I'm playing a little bit fun with numbers. Everything's on a per capita basis. That's because we're a small state, but we punch above our weight. We are the number 1 in the US and have been forever in per capita GDP. And we are the top state in terms of federal contracts per capita. Our defense sector is quite robust. But this is actually almost more important to me. When I chose to move here, my family and I live in New Canaan. You know, we didn't sit down and analyze the relative growth of our GDP and decide to move to Connecticut. This was really the reason why we moved here. It's an incredible place to raise a family. The quality of life here is awesome. You know, it's one of the few places where you can drive to both ski and see. And I think this is actually really important. I think this comes across as soft and fluffy, but in my mind, these are the types of things that bring people here. And I also think we're the net beneficiary of a more hybrid working environment. So historically, really forever, you had to locate yourself where your business was, right? That was where you went. So it was really about, could you commute to some of those centers of excellence? Now, probably a lot of folks in this room can work anywhere. So why not work where the quality of life is high? So I actually think this sets us up quite well for continued growth. Okay, a little bit about innovation in Connecticut. So here's a summary of just the technology sector. We have $8 billion in tech GDP across the state, over 7,000 tech establishments, and Bloomberg ranked us the 4th most innovative state behind Massachusetts, California, and Washington State. So we've got some work to do, but 4th is not that bad. And it's growing. So this sector, this technology sector, has been growing consistently right up into the pandemic, and I think it's now, we'll see this data as it comes out, but I think this growth has now accelerated post-pandemic. A little summary of some of the companies that are here. Hopefully some of you are in the room tonight. And I keep talking about this post-COVID tech boom. And I think one of the reasons why we're accelerating and growing as quickly as we are is because all of the inputs are here. You know, somebody asked me, I was interviewed for this article that's going to come out next week, and they asked, well, how do you create innovation? How do you, as a state contributor, how do you create innovation? And the answer is it's not easy. You can't wave a magic wand and say, go innovate. You have to create all of the inputs. You have to build the muscle that is an ecosystem that can enable innovation. And I think we have the inputs. The inputs are talent, the inputs are capital, access to capital, and I'll go through some of those here. So in terms of talent, this is the graduates coming out of our state universities, our educational institutions with degrees in tech. You can see how much it's grown and the acceleration that's occurred since 2014. The goal here, by the way, is just to keep these folks here, right? So we're producing incredible innovators, and really the goal is just to have them stay rather than move out of the state. Leads up to this growing talent ecosystem. So this is, I don't know if you can really see it, but it summarizes just the growth in things like engineers and scientists and database admins and architects. You know, all of these contributors to that talent ecosystem are all growing nicely. And this is just a visual representation of where they're locating themselves. I don't know if this is a surprise to anyone. It really wasn't to me. I mean, you can just trace this along our major highways. But we do refer to this as our innovation corridor. So this is the corridor of where a lot of these innovators are locating themselves, and these are the ecosystems we're going to seek to continue to promote and defend. A bit on access to capital. So $3.2 billion in venture was invested in our companies in 2022. We are the number 10th state in terms of venture capital deals per capita. Some of the folks that are here doing this work, hopefully some of these folks are invested in some of your companies. But again, it's large and continues to grow. But I think this is the most important part. You know, how do you put all of these pieces together and start to build ecosystems? And this is some of the work that we're doing. So $110 million to invest in regional sector partnerships. This is internships and reskilling and career bridge programs, really helping people that might not have entered this when they graduated from college, but help them reskill and enter it now. I mentioned innovation corridors, up to $500 million. This is investing in placemaking opportunities. I'll talk about a couple in a minute, but this is really investing in these physical spaces, not because necessarily we expect companies to relocate. I actually think we have to reinvent the way we think about headquarters mattering. It's really about building these innovative ecosystems and clusters where people want to work, live, and play. I'll give a couple examples in a minute. Our Climate Tech Fund, this is a $100 million fund being run by Connecticut Innovations, who I'll mention in a moment. And then Broadband for All. I suspect for the people in this room, thinking about broadband access as a required prerequisite for innovation may not be top of mind. But the reality is, if we're moving to a world where anyone can innovate and you don't necessarily have to travel to a physical location to do so, this becomes the real price of entry. You actually can't participate in this virtual economy if you don't have a broadband way of doing so. And so this is an area where we continue to invest in to make sure the entire state has access to the innovation economy. I mentioned some of the physical placemaking work that we're doing. So this is a project we're working on in Stamford. It's a tech and data campus in collaboration with UConn. In New Haven, this is a bioscience incubator that we've built in cooperation and coordination with Yale. So these are the types of projects I hope that we can continue to invest in and that you'll see. There is an ecosystem of public-private partnerships available to you all to help you build and scale. I hope you know about all of these, but just in case, I'm going to give a brief commercial. But I'm around, and I'm going to put my email address up at the end. If I can introduce any of you to any of these folks where it might be relevant, just let me know. CT Next is focused on building out, fostering relationships with very early stage companies, helping them find early stage funding, and then helping invest in and grow those ecosystems I described. Connecticut Innovations is our state-sponsored venture capital arm, over 200 portfolio companies. And then Advanced CT, I think of as our business development arm. Advanced CT, and that's who I stole all these slides from, by the way. Advanced CT is focused on, when I say business development, it's about attracting new companies to the state and retaining those that are already here. But again, a reasonably mature and robust ecosystem of public-private partnerships to kind of support the innovation economy. And I view my role as really just helping to catalyze and manage efforts that is already happening. It's not like I was brought in to fix some problem. I was brought in, I think, to really help accelerate the solution. So let me just close on a personal note and ask for your help. So the reason why I was excited to take on this role is I mentioned kind of my wife and I always being focused on a period of service, but the innovation economy changed my life. I've learned that everyone in public service has what they call a log cabin story. So forgive me as I share mine, but I grew up with 8 people packed into a 3-bedroom. My wife was the first generation to attend college. I taught myself how to code in the early 90s and built an e-commerce website. By the way, it completely failed and didn't go anywhere. But the bug bit me, and that's how I ended up getting into and understanding what was the innovation economy, and it changed the trajectory of my life. So my view now is I've been able to do that for the last 25 years. My genuine goal now is to support all of you for the next 25 years. Whatever I can do to help anyone else participate in the innovation economy is my ultimate goal. And the reason why I say I do need your help is I really want to hear and understand what your challenges are. So I put my email address up here. I encourage all of you to reach out at your convenience. If I can be helpful to you, I will. My only request is, oftentimes I say that and I hear, hey, can you help me find venture funding? I appreciate the constraint. I know that's a challenge. I will be helpful in any way I can around the ecosystem, but just don't assume that I'm gonna hand over the ATM card, even though I wish I could. So that's it for me. Again, I really appreciate you guys allowing me to wing this. That was my test run of this, so I'm curious on your feedback. And I will leave it at that. You want to put your slide back up with the logo?
Yeah, leave it up.
Greetings. Can everyone hear me? Hello. My name is Jay Norris. I'm also one of the board members of Startup Westport, and I'm glad to be here with you tonight. I'm also a startup founder, so I have a lot of questions for Dan. All right? Dan, thanks for being here. And Cliff, thank you. Dan, I just wanted to start off by saying, you didn't leave your personal email up there. I'm just kidding. No, but start off by saying, thanks for being here, because that was a very thorough presentation. Don't you guys think? What do you think? All right? Right? It's very thorough. And the thought that, what you've learned, you want to take into help others. Have you started creating any kind of programming outside of that thus far? Like anything?
I have not. By the way, my personal email address is dok@dok.net. I'm slowly but surely co-opting my initials in all forms over the internet. I started July 5th, so give me a little bit of time to really put some of these programs in place. But what I would also say to you is I spent the first few months, and I spent 6 months deciding whether or not this was the right role for me. Right. And I would say a couple things. The first thing I would say is, and I'm not a politician. I'm not here to pander for anybody, but I will tell you that we have incredible people working for this state. Mm-hmm. Deeply impressed by the team from the governor on down, and it's people who really understand the need to invest for future ROI. Understand the concept that you have to invest in these ecosystems if you expect to see them produce the results we want to see. But it's smart investing. Right, it's investing with an expectation that there will be that return, even if that return isn't necessarily purely financial. So I've been very impressed by the people involved. I set up there, and I mean it. There are programs in place that are actually quite strong and thriving. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't walk into it and say, I've got to change something or make a meaningful addition. I view this as steady as we go. It really was just just 3 years ago that we kind of started to come out of this pandemic and started to be able to see, kind of growth without this minor externality. And now I think we're seeing the benefits.
Right. I'm sure that have a lot to do with your, inspire you to join, because if it was the way it was 3 years ago, but you saw the curve, you saw it going up, you saw the lift.
So 3 years ago, if I could have predicted the pandemic, I'd be sitting on my private island right now.
Right.
So I can't suggest for a second I saw that. No, the pandemic had, well, actually that's not true. Let me be truthful and honest. The pandemic allowed me to, I think, stay doing what I was doing longer because the travel component of it was not as acute. When that ended and I started going back into the city again, I did say to myself, why don't I just stay? Connecticut's an incredible place. Nice. I enjoyed my time at home with my family. I've got young girls, 14 and 11. Now I think the pandemic's allowed me to do this, right? The pandemic has allowed all of us to realize you don't necessarily have to go to a physical place to contribute anymore. And that's why I'll keep coming back to, I actually really do think our economy can be a net beneficiary of that trend. Because there's a lot of folks like me, I suspect a lot of folks like you, who sort of said, it's great right here. Let me figure out how I can contribute right here.
Right. That's essentially why we started Westport and Cliff.
And by the way, real quick, 4 years ago, pick your number, there's zero chance Startup Westport would have gotten this many people in the audience. This is a tangible data point of the trends I'm describing.
Right. Now, thanks. That was a question I had for Cliff. Was, when I was listening to the Hamilton piece, I ultimately thought about our conversations earlier. And so, Cliff, tell me, when you first brought this up, a year or two ago, was it before COVID, or was it when COVID happened that you realized that this was what needs to happen at this time?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jay. So, as I mentioned, there's been just a tectonic shift in Connecticut and Fairfield County as a result of COVID. And so, Dan, you alluded to, Connecticut's economy prior to COVID. But, look around this room, look around town, there's been just dramatic change. And so we've attracted here in Westport a certain type of individual who in the past might not have come to Westport because they had a requirement to be in New York City in order to meet their, job obligations or for any other host of reasons. But now here we are in 2023, and all of a sudden work-life balance has taken on greater importance. I think that there's a recognition that what lives or happens in New York can be replicated. And so what I've said to people, anyone who will listen, which is that a commute from Westport to New York City 5 days a week to a job where you need to be at a desk 9 to 5, in my mind, is soul-crushing. If you can go there 2 times a week, 3 times a week, and have the benefits of living here in Westport, working from Westport, that's the type of work-life balance that I think that Dan is alluding to. And that's why here at Startup Westport, we're trying to create some of the benefits that people are looking for, some of the services, some of the content, some of the connectivity, and actually replicate that here in Westport so people don't have to leave Westport to go into New York City and can do that on a local level.
Great answer. I mean, that was my thought here. I have a question for the audience, though. Who in the audience is a startup or a technology founder?
Awesome.
Okay. Take note, Dan. And who here is investor? Oh, wow. Really take note. No, I'm just kidding. And so, Dan, I have just one more question for you, and then we're opening it up. Where's Peter? Peter? Okay. We're going to open it up to the audience. But Dan, I have one more question for you. Why New Canaan?
I'll tell you the story. So we got pregnant with number 2. We were in the city. We got pregnant with number 2, which is when all systems break. I was traveling for work. We had a dog that had to go out for a walk. My wife was 8 months pregnant. And she hit mute on the TV one day and said, I need to talk to you. And she said it in such a serious tone that I thought something was wrong with the baby. And she said, no, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to move out I want to move out into the burbs. And so the reason why New Canaan, true, genuine story, is I had a friend who lived there, and had one day to figure it out. I went out there because that's where he lived, and I said, this is good, done. And we were there a month later. So it happened very quickly. Now, what I will say to you, though, is I love New Canaan, and I love this area. It is, it's not as diverse as I would like. So I think we all need to kind of work on that. It is not as diverse as I would like, but I do think the quality of life, I do think the educational system, I think the community is incredible, and I'm describing not just New Canaan, but this area in general.
No, New Canaan is beautiful. I wasn't going to say that. I just had to do it because in front of all the Westporters, I had to do it. So. We have another board member over here, Peter Kropp, guys.
So I'd like to ask people if they have questions to come join me. I'm going to kick it off with the first question, but if you have a question, please come up and speak into the microphone. So Cliff and I planned this ahead of time, but one of the startups that was on Dan's charts came out of Yale undergrad, and then the old Yale Entrepreneurship Institute. And then got invested by Cliff's company, Launch Capital. They're called Arccos Golf. Cliff, we talked about Arccos had some interesting news lately. They've made a big partnership with the PGA. But one of the things that you talked about was sort of the financial fundamentals of their story. And maybe you could just take people through that. It's just an interesting story to get a little more into the meat of what it's like to have an idea for a startup and that trajectory along the way, and what are the decisions you might make along the way?
Sure. No, Peter and I did discuss Arccos, and Arccos is actually an investment that was made by Launch Capital as well as Connecticut Innovations probably about 12 years ago. So it's been a long track. I don't know, does anybody here use Arccos Golf? Any golfers? Great. So for those that don't know the app, it's effectively a tracking app that you use when you play golf, and it tracks every one of your shots. It's a pretty cool application because for most golfers, they tend to be highly analytical, highly frustrated, but also highly analytical. And so the tagline for Arccos is basically it's your own personal digital caddy in your bag. And so the organization, as I mentioned, has been around for at least 12 years. It was started by a graduate from Yale, and recently announced an amazing partnership with the PGA Tour. And the partnership is basically, I think, Arccos is now the official data partner of the PGA Tour. So, just great accolades. But what Peter was alluding to is with venture, and Dan spoke to this earlier, Dan's a growth investor, was a growth investor. Launch Capital is more of a early stage investor. And these journeys that, founders put themselves on are long ones. I'm a 3-time founder. So I've done this for my entire career. I started in the early 90s, before anybody even called me a founder. People just called me crazy, because there was no true tech ecosystem. There was no financial or VC ecosystem. You just went out and you basically bootstrapped these organizations and you tried to grow businesses. And so what I would say, and what Peter's alluding to, is that there's a financial reality when you're starting a company, and it's important for people to recognize that as you go through the process of raising money, that you understand that that process of capital raise is aligned with whatever your natural instincts or your objectives are with regards to the greater company. So if you're trying to build a $1 billion company, well, you need to go out and raise a lot of money. And so you would start with a company like Launch Capital, a fund like Launch Capital, hopefully achieve some traction, product market fit, and demonstrate that this is a business that can actually scale. And then you turn to a guy like Dan in his previous life, and you'd get growth capital, and you try and build a company that would have a $1 billion outcome. But what I always caution and advise people is calibrate according to what your ambition is. And if your ambition is a positive outcome, the less money that you raise, the less pressure that you're going to have for a big outcome, which means a greater likelihood of success. And so as you're kind of going through this process, so all these founders out there, being mindful as you're actually going through the capital raise process to calibrate accordingly with what your ambitions are and your co-founders' ambitions are, and your prospective investors.
Great.
Anyone else with a question?
Any questions? Hands up. Any questions, audience? Peter, you see?
Okay, come on.
Don't be scared, guys. It's okay. We're fine.
Wrote it down. Okay. So as you consider the challenges that people go through in a startup, excluding getting investors or capital, are there any challenges that you see that trend among startups and entrepreneurs that could easily be mitigated or turned around maybe earlier from the start, again, beyond attaining initial capital or financing?
You want to take that one, Jay?
Are you saying, could you repeat that? Because
Yeah, so like when you consider entrepreneurs, startup companies, other than getting financing, which is of course a challenge, right? Or getting investors, are there other challenges that you see, these sometimes creative spirits or people who are willing to take these risks, challenges that you see among them or things that trend as a challenge among these types of people that are willing to take this risk that you would have advice for?
Wow, interesting question. Yeah, I would be one of those. One of those founders. I think it's, like I said, it's the entrepreneur spirit. The technology or innovation journey for me has been, for me personally, is new. But I've been an entrepreneur for almost 20 years, at least, and it's just being creative as far as how you go about sourcing capital, but also being able to iterate and pivot and balancing. It's almost what we talked about here with Startup Westport, work-life balance for an entrepreneur or anybody starting any kind of new venture is tricky, and you need a support system. So I'm gonna lean right into why you all are here, is because the resources to be able to be in your neighborhood or your community, to be able to reach over to someone who is received seed funding, Series A, Series B, and to be able to have these conversations on how they've done it. Like Cliff, 3-time founder of 3 different companies. How did he do his work-life balance? How when his kids were younger, what is that like? I ask him questions like that all the time. Like, when your kids were younger, how did you balance that? So I think it is the network effect. So it's a great question.
I might just add, pick your partners carefully. And this analogy always gets thrown around that these partnerships when companies are growing are like marriages, and I think that's actually true. They're just much harder to separate from. And I use the term partners purposefully. It's everything from your co-founders. That's actually what I've seen the most. Again, I invest at the growth stage, so typically I'm just hearing about what happened during the early stages of growth. And I can't tell you how many times I hear there's some ex-founder on the cap table because it didn't work out. And oftentimes, I suspect for those for whom it did work out, they saw signs of it not being the right fit early. Just being super careful there. Cliff mentioned misalignment in terms of expectations of your investors on outcome. I think picking your capital partners very carefully, just making sure you are super aligned on what the trajectory is going to be. Just really being thoughtful about that, because by the time you realize you've made a mistake, it can be super hard and expensive to extract yourself from it.
Yeah, I guess what I might add is be intellectually honest with yourself, and it's a hard thing to do. So especially, there's so much excitement when you're launching a company, and as Dan mentioned, that if you're doing it with a group of people, it's important to really, really look into the mirror and be honest with yourself and make sure that everybody is being true with regards to what their objectives are. And that alignment is absolutely 100% critical, because starting a company is a decade-long commitment, and there are going to be bumps in the road, and there's no such thing as a linear path up and to the right, and so you got to be ready for that. And so having the perseverance and having the ability to recognize that there will be those challenges, and kind of hunkering down and really being ready and willing and able to fight through that, I think that's really important at the outset.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to add one last piece to this. To kind of piggyback off what you just said, is picking those partners, of course, is everything. But, you know, you really want to pick partners. You'll have your zone of genius, and you want to find others or founders that align with that. But to me, it's all about cultivating that trust, right? Because that's essentially why I feel like we're here and we're building this kind of neighborhood community of innovative thinkers. But we need to meet more, have more experience with each other so that we can develop some kind of relationship and trust. And that's how I found other co-founders throughout the years. Is like, it didn't happen overnight, but I cultivated a relationship with them, and I found out their zone of genius. And if it aligned with the organization, we partnered up. But there's still checks and balances that have to happen throughout the journey.
Yeah, I like that because you really want to work with someone and partner with someone who has other skills that maybe you don't have to help balance that out and bring a new perspective to the table.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thanks for tonight. This is amazing. My question, I think, is for Dan to describe a little bit more about the places. You know, some of those buildings that were being created. I think, as we all know, you can work from anywhere, but it does get very isolating to be working from your home. Yeah. And you're on your own and you're virtual and things like that. But yet, having places, when you talk about the resources, and you know, you want to be together, you want to be in person, because things happen not always during meetings, but just because things happen. And I'm involved in a number of projects, and some of them are virtual. Some of them we call the Spotted Horse our office, because and it's during lunchtime. But it seems like having it's nice that we have this amazing library. If we had more spaces where people were meeting, just kind of because we happen to be in the same place at the same time. And some of those buildings seem cool, but I'm just wondering, is there more resources like that we could take advantage of?
Yeah, and by the way, you just sort of did my job for me because you described exactly what we're talking about, which is not just a place to live. Anyone could build an apartment building. People have been building apartment buildings, since the dawn of time. I guess they were in caves. What we're talking about is places where you can work, live, and play. That's literally the tagline. So it's focusing on supporting development that has these multi-use, truly ecosystems where you go not just to live, but to collaborate, but to see other people. It's that kind of creativity, ideation, that's what takes place when you've got density of people. I think that's clearly what we lost during the pandemic, and I think that's what we're trying to rebuild now as we continue to invest in some of those opportunities. But it's very specifically not just a place to live. And if you look at some of the development that's going on, and those buildings I put up, they're collaborative spaces. It's no longer, let's try to get company to build their headquarters here. We still do that. We'll continue to do that. It'll always be part of our economic development. But it's more about actually getting clusters of people to want to co-locate someplace because they can benefit from that co-location. It's not just because their company happens to be headquartered there.
Yeah, but I think maybe for Cliff, as we think about Westport, when I go to WeWork, I'm like, yeah, I'd love to go and work in a WeWork, or, I know there are some local spaces around here, but those are all in New York City. So there's nothing even in Stanford for us there. But having some local spaces, is there something that you guys have been thinking about and resource-wise?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there actually is Serendipity Labs, who's actually located up here on the Post Road. And so I've heard about more and more startups actually co-locating there. Look, I didn't actually address this in the overview of Startup Westport, but we're about a minute old, and I should have actually referenced that. So the ideation for Startup Westport was, less than 12 months ago. The group that is the steering committee has been meeting for less than 9 months. And so there are many, many opportunities on our path forward. And that question has been asked multiple times. There's like the light lifts, which is kind of getting everybody here together at the library. Then there's the really, really heavy lifts, which is committing to a personal space or a physical space. So at some point, it's on the roadmap. We'll discuss it. Whether or not we get there, we'll see. It would require a pretty substantial investment. But there are opportunities here within town, and I'm seeing it more and more, and I would, kind of refer you to Serendipity Labs, at least at the start. as a place where there starts to be, at least like-minded people who are part of this early stage Westport ecosystem.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg.
No, thanks. What's your name again?
Greg Vonderay.
Greg, okay. So when we create the placemaking committee,
Start with Greg.
That's right.
this
Look
guy,
me up.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
My email is DOK.
But look you up, dude. Definitely. But we have heard that numerous times working on it.
Thank you all for your comments. It's interesting in some ways. Seems to be some kind of reversal in some of the trends that we saw during the pandemic when it comes to like the dominance of certain tech hubs in the United States. So, during the pandemic, a lot of people left San Francisco, but you are starting to see a lot of people return to these cities. And, the AI moment right now is very much happening in San Francisco. So I'm thinking like for a place like Connecticut, which has benefited a lot from this pandemic moment and a little bit after that, like how are we thinking about retaining the people that have come out here? So that's my first part of the question. And then for Dan specifically, how are you thinking about building your team at the state to execute on the innovation economy goal?
Yep. So on your first question around, these innovation clusters, which you mentioned geographies like San Francisco, but that's really what they are, right? Regardless of geography. We've got, so if you think about Stanford and fintech and in actually a burgeoning crypto, and I'm not taking a position on any of these sectors or companies and suggesting what's going to be good or positive or negative. I'm just saying we're starting to see clustering. You see it in Stanford, you see it around our urban cores. You see it in Stanford, you see it in New Haven around biotech, you see it in Hartford in InStech and fintech. And so, as I said in my presentation, the pieces are here. And so I think it's really about just investing to accelerate the continued growth of those clusters. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that one of our cities is going to overtake Boston, New York, even Seattle, San Francisco. I'd love to do it. I said it's a 25-year job, so I've got some time, and that is my ultimate goal. But I think it's less about comparing to some of those places that are absolutely best in class, and more about just looking at the assets we have in place and defending them in sectors in which we have real comparative advantage. So I think there is a real possibility there, and that's my focus. On my team, so I'm looking at this as leveraging people and investment that's already in place. So I consider my extended team, by the way, I don't know if they would agree, but CT Next and CI and Advanced CT and the folks that are those, which are large teams, already focusing on supporting the innovation world. Whether or not I add people specifically, by the way, I sit inside something called the DECD, which is the Department of Economic and Community Development. That's 100 people doing good work on behalf of the state, so that is also my team. Whether or not I add direct resources, I actually haven't decided yet. I'm not sure it's necessary. I said at the outset, we're very focused on making smart investments and making sure there's a return on that investment. There's genuinely good people already doing this work. So I view my role as more as of a catalyst and a manager of all of those streams.
Awesome, thank you.
This is our last question.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Mark Mathias. I have a three-part item for you. One is a comment, one's a question, then I have something specifically for you. We have an innovation economy here in Connecticut, and this is demonstrated pre-pandemic. We actually worked with the library here for almost 9 years to put together what was the Northeast State's largest creativity and innovation event. We regularly attracted between 10 and 15,000 people here to Westport for a day of innovation and creativity. We'd love to talk about bringing some of that back and expanding that to you. The next part is the actual question part, and I'd like to talk. Every discussion, whether you're investing, typically requires difficult questions to be asked and answered. And I'm asking this question with the love that I have in my heart here for it. How do we as a state compete with other geographies that are perceived and perhaps actually more business friendly? You take Texas is far more business friendly in a lot of ways than perhaps Connecticut is. I'd like to have perhaps a brief question, a brief answer on that. Because that comes to how do you attract people, and by being business friendly is a way to do that.
Yeah, and by the way, you're asking a question that's above my pay grade, but I'm still going to answer it, at least to the best of my ability. I'll give you my personal view.
Officially, you're going to start till Monday, right?
Connecticut is never going to be a low-cost state. I think we just have to accept that, right? I mean, it's a reality. So if people want to move to a place that is zero income taxes or, super friendly corporate environment, I get it. I think temperature trends are in our favor. I've got lots of friends that moved down to Miami during the pandemic. They're all coming back. And what I genuinely think is what I said. We've got to invest and defend and protect our comparative advantage. What is our comparative advantage? How come we all don't live down in Texas or Florida or pick your low-cost state? It's because of the culture. It's because of the quality of life. It's because of the quality of education. It's because it's an incredible place to raise a family. Like, that's the stuff. But by the way, none of that's cheap, right? You have to invest in those assets to continue to be perceived, accurately so, as an incredible place to live. And so that's really my focus. I for one, again, we'll see where my path takes me and whether I'm eventually involved in any decisions that you just described. But what I can tell you is I think we should just continue to invest in being an incredible place, and the rest takes care of itself.
Okay. And the last thing I told you I had something for you. A few years ago, because we want to be perceived as a place of innovation, we created and applied for and have had approved by the Connecticut State Department of Motor Vehicles an official State of Innovation license plate. And we need to get 400 orders for them before they will produce them. But I made one for you. I mocked one up, and you can take it home with you tonight.
I love it.
That's
Thank you very much.
awesome.
The idea
That's
here,
awesome.
if you're going to be innovative, tell people about it. So it's a bit of a double entendre, the State of Innovation.
That's amazing. But I will tell you, as I got to defend my name here, I'm going to pencil in my apostrophe between the O and the K.
That is really cool.
Thank you very much.
Wow.
You're welcome.
That's great.
Very kind of you. Thank you.
You know what? I'm going to wrap up. I got one more question. Have you, Dan, and I know you just got this call a couple days ago, have you witnessed any other town in Connecticut with this type of energy for innovation? And
here's what I will say. I love New Canaan, and I mean that.
Yeah,
if we held that event in New Canaan, the audience would not be as this.
See, I'm trying to get you to.
So well done. Hat tip to Westport.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I think the bar is going to be open.
Hold on, guys. Hold on. I do this, everybody that I've met before. Pull out your phone. Please pull out your phone. And we're going to put in our phone, we're going to save the date. Let's make sure, he said it earlier, November 28th. Let's lock that in our phones, please. All right? And I do this every time, guys. It's something, I used to do events years ago, and I love to make sure that we all see each other and make sure we locked it.
And by the way, I too would have preferred the other speaker who was supposed to be here tonight, so I will come back for that event because I would also like to hear his remarks.
I can't wait.
Well, we'll definitely have send you an invite. Thank you so much, Dan. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
And thank you all for coming.
That's it. Thanks for coming. Let's snap.